If you look at astrology through what it's designed to do, which is to help us navigate these different cycles of life, it's not a bad way to navigate life because it helps keep things in perspective.
Welcome to Supernormalized, the podcast where we challenge the conventional, break boundaries, and normalize the supernatural. Join me, CG, as we explore uncharted realms of existence and unravel the mysteries of our universe. If you have unusual knowledge or a unique story you'd love to share, reach out to me at supernormalized@proton.me. Let's make the supernatural the new normal. Today on Supernormalized, you'll meet Michael Spremulli, a renowned data-driven workplace personality expert and professional astrologer. With nearly 30 years of experience in interpreting astrology charts, Michael offers a unique perspective on this captivating subject. His journey with astrology began when he had a life-changing reading from a professional astrologer prior to starting grad school. Since then, Michael has dedicated himself to uncovering individual opportunity trends by analyzing the impact of transiting planets on birth charts. What sets Michael apart is his scientific approach to astrology, actively engaging in current vibrational astrology research that sheds new light on its underlying principles and calculations. Today, Michael shares his expertise, discussing the recent scientific validation of astrology and exploring its value as a tool for better self-understanding and practical application in daily life. Join us today for an engaging and enlightening exploration of astrology in a modern format, which is vibrational astrology. Dear listeners, I truly appreciate your company on this audio journey, and if you're enjoying Supernormalized, I kindly ask for your support in reaching more curious minds just like yours. Please share this show with your friends and family, and also take a minute to jump onto your podcast app and give us a 5-star rating so that the algorithms and the computers know that this is a conversation worth sharing. Thank you so much for your support. Welcome to Supernormalized, Michael.
Yes.
Michael, look, you've been doing astrology for quite a while, but you've taken a tact which I've never heard of before that obviously my listeners will be just as interested as I am, which is vibrational astrology. Can you tell us about vibrational astrology, what that is, how you came to that? Is there an origin story for you and all this? And
yeah, no, there's an origin story.
All right, well, let's jump straight in.
So here's my astrology journey in under 2 minutes.
Oh, okay.
In 1994, when I was between undergraduate and graduate degrees, someone at the place where I was working gifted me a reading with an astrologer. Now, I should preface that by saying that my training is in clinical psychology. So I come out of the science/data analytics side of things, and data is very important to me. So I was working in a psychiatric hospital, wasn't sure what the next steps of my life was going to be. And someone said, "Why don't you go see this astrologer? I've been seeing her for years, and she's really helpful." And I had mixed emotions. I said, okay. I was raised in a faith-based system that really didn't endorse astrology, and I was conflicted. Well, needless to say, I had the reading. It changed my life. Within an hour of not knowing anything about me, just from looking at my birth chart, this astrologer proceeded to summarize my past up to that point, identify exactly what challenges I was dealing with at the moment, and then proceeded to make some forecasts about what I could expect over the next months and years ahead. And this was for me not saying a word because I didn't even know what to go in and ask. And it was mind-blowing. I said, this is an interesting world and I want to know more. So then I went off to grad school, which of course they beat anything out of you that can't be proven with data or metrics. So the whole time I'm in grad school getting my master's in clinical psych, I'm studying astrology quietly, independently by myself. Started with some books, of course, and tapes and videos. This was back in the 90s. So come 2007, I took a big leap. I'm long out of graduate school. I'm working in clinical settings, providing therapy and what have you. And I purchased some professional astrology software. And then the floodgates opened for me because I started doing chart workups for anyone who was within 100-mile radius of me. If I knew you, I wanted to run your chart, and I wanted to talk to you about your chart because I was learning. I mean, I was not a professional at that time. I was just kind of putting things together. Well, before you know it, just through the years of study, I would be doing people's charts and giving them some forecast information about transits that would be impacting them down the road. And every 6 months or so, they say, can I get another one of those forecast things? I'll happily pay you for it. And I said, okay. Before I realized that I had a side hustle before the term side hustle was even coined. So this is all great. I'm loving astrology. It's kind of cool. But there was always this part of me that was like, I can never do this professionally or go wide with this because I need data. I'm a data guy. So I've always had a foot in two worlds. I like psychology and metrics and the statistics that are involved, but I've also been attracted to things like hypnosis and tarot and astrology, of course. And the two worlds seem to really not square on the surface until I ran into vibrational astrology, which showed up on my radar roughly around 2010, somewhere in there. So here's how vibrational astrology is different. I'm not the inventor or discoverer of VA, but David Cochran is. And he is he's the guy who started this form of astrology. And his research goes back to the 1970s, where he would consult. I think he consulted with over 10,000 people and looked at their charts and interviewed them and said, here's what the astrology suggests is going on. Is this indeed the case? Yes or no? And wanting to get the no's as much as he wanted to hear the yeses. And he started to build this model. Fast forward to now, the late 2015s and what have you. He is the only astrologer who managed to create a model that is now evidence-based, which simply means there is data behind the claims to support what's going on. Because one of the things that always bothered me about astrology is, let's say someone comes to you and says, well, I want to know what's going on in my home life. Well, in traditional astrology, the fourth house, which is just a section of the chart, represents home life. Well, if you look in someone's fourth house and they have no planets going on there, only the planet that is on the cusp, there's not that much to work with. So in traditional astrology, it's like, well, you need to go look at who rules the fourth house. And before you know it, you're off on a wild goose chase, running all over the chart, trying to find the final dispositor and all these other things. And to me, it was like, it may work, but it doesn't fit my analytical background. We don't do that in VA because we have a very systematized format of how to interpret things, and we follow certain rules. And if things fit, great. And if not, that's fine too. Because here's the main difference behind VA compared to other forms of astrology. We're looking at energy flow. If I had to summarize vibrational astrology in one sentence, it's simply looking at how the energy is optimally designed to flow for you as an individual. And when I say energy, I'm not talking about some woo-woo, whoa, feel the spirits. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That's, that's all cool. But when we're talking energy, we're talking about what are the forces that are driving us to make certain things happen or avoid other things. In traditional astrology, it's based on an archetypal model. The sun represents yourself. The moon represents your mother. Saturn may represent your father. And that's all well and good. But where VA goes is, all right, these archetypes have to be born out of something. Where do they come from? And that's what we look at in VA, the underlying energy processes that are driving human behavior and have an influence on us. So I think it was a little more than 2 minutes, but that's kind of what's got me to where I am today.
Excellent. That's a very good rounded description of what happened for you. I appreciate that. Now, Also, was wondering though, did you read a book by David Cochran or did you do a course? What happened?
Okay. So here's where it all started, and I have no financial interest in this. I'm not pimping books or anything.
Sure.
If you're interested in vibrational astrology, you can see this is very well worn. I've got tape holding it together in tabs.
Yeah.
It's all in here.
Mm.
It's literally all in here. Now, having said that, so is music theory. Music, and the book is simply called Vibrational Astrology, The Essentials by David Cochran. Music theory is all in a book. You learn it, and then it takes you 20 years to do something with it. So it's very similar because it's a different approach than traditional astrology. So that's where I started. And then I discovered that he put out a ton of training videos online on YouTube, and it blew my mind because it was in some ways flying in the face of other traditional astrological beliefs. And I want to go on record by saying, I'm not going after other astrologers. Do what works for you. Those other models just didn't quite fit with me. So VA is what fits with me. The other models may work sometimes, but in VA, our ability to really zone in on particular things with precision is at a level that I had not seen before in other forms of VA. So I started with the book, and then he came out with a couple of other books, and I'm devouring his YouTube videos, and I'm connecting with other vibrational astrologers. And it's funny you mentioned, training. Right now, I'm in the midst of a 2-year mentorship with David, where we're studying. There's a very small cohort of people where we look at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of charts. And what impressed me about his training is that it was very similar to how I was trained to administer intellectual and personality assessments when I was in graduate school. The way we had to do that and get feedback is we would record the administration, not so much for personality tests, but for IQ testing. There's a whole bunch of things you have to do as the examiner. And there's a very stringent protocol that must be followed. Otherwise, you'll spoil portions of the test and it's not going to give you valid results. So we'd have to videotape us administering these IQ tests to individuals and then turn that 1.5 hour administration tape into the professor. And then he would review all of it and give you notes. Here's what you did right. You did this wrong. You mentioned this too soon. That's exactly the way that David provides feedback, because you can learn, I obviously did, the basics of astrology through self-study. Absolutely. But if you really want to get into it and you want to do it professionally, you need to have someone guiding you. You just have to, because we form our own opinions in our head, and, they may be right. They may not be right, although, we think they are. So it's, and the cool thing about VA is we're just at the beginning as far as research. I'm actually involved with a small research team where we're looking at different things because it's fertile ground. And what's enabled the research to really start happening at a brisk pace is the advent of professional astrology software that is able to analyze large number of charts on a PC. Because we work with, in the software that I use, there are 90,000 birth charts in there of famous people in history. And what we can do is, if we have an idea, we can say, well, show me all the people in the database who have these type of configurations, sun and moon positioned here or there. And we start to look at consistent patterns and see whether or not the hypothesis holds up. And we're right on the cusp, bad pun intended, of really seeing an explosion of research in VA, so much so that some academics are starting to get involved in the research of VA, which has never happened, because all they would attempt to do in the past is look at a sun sign and see if that correlated with the supposed behaviors. And it's not about the signs. It's about the planets. But I digress. All right. I'm getting too
that was excited.
I
love it.
Yeah, I get excited about this stuff because everyone knows astrology. You think, oh, well, I'm a Capricorn, I'm a Virgo.
Yeah.
I'm a this, I'm a that. In VA, we place a much less of an emphasis on signs. Signs give us some color. I like to think of signs as sort of like being finishing salt on a recipe, or a little accent or the cherry on top. They do give us some information, but here's some recent research that he just conducted. He looked at 20,000 married couples, 20,000, looking to see were there patterns regarding what signs ended up marrying other signs. Take a guess as to what the research revealed.
It revealed that the most popular understanding of prior astrological research probably wasn't exactly true.
Well, you're right there. There was zero correlation.
Oh no, really?
Zero.
That much?
Zero correlation. Now,
Wow.
does that mean that, well, a Capricorn is not going to get along with an X or Y? No, some of the times it might. But remember, when we're looking at data, there has to be a certain threshold of significance.
Yes.
And there wasn't any more than related to chance. So the signs, they help color what's going on, but ultimately the planets bring the particular type of energy to the stage, and how those planets aspect with other planets and connect in your birth chart ultimately are what paint the picture of an individual.
Wow, that's huge. So this big data approach obviously has been done by many, many people at the same time. Are you guys also throwing it through AI as well and bringing
Well, yeah, we're just starting to look at that, because you see, one of the things, admittedly, and I'll jump out in front on this, as well as other astrologers. Admittedly, astrologers have been horrible at doing research. They want to see clients. They want to provide services. All right, that's cool. Academics have been horrible at doing research in astrology because they don't know astrology. You can't just pluck a variable out at random if you don't know basic foundational astrology nomenclature. So what's happening now is, because there's a subgroup of astrologers in VA who not only enjoy using and being a practitioner of vibrational astrology, but like to look at different answers as far as what's driving things, that world is starting to come together. So you've got astrologers, and by the way, David Cochran, his master's is in research and experimental design. So it's important to note that the research that is being done is not just some flim-flam stuff. I believe his degree's from the University of Florida, which is not too shabby of an institution here in the States. So there's finally now at the VA level practitioners who are looking to see what works in consultation, and then seeing, does that actually work on the research side? And as that expands, it's starting to get the interest of academicians to potentially look at this on a larger scale. But when you look at the big picture, there's really no incentive for people in academia to validate astrology, and a lot of them won't touch it with a 10-foot pole because they're afraid it'll ruin their profession. And I'm guilty of that to some degree. What I do with corporate clients, I'm actually a personality profiler. And that's what my expertise has been. In addition to doing astrology kind of very quietly up until the last few years, I assess individuals based on their personality to let companies know how well they're going to be fit into the particular environment. And I kept the astrology stuff very hush-hush because I didn't want my corporate clients thinking, well, this guy's just pulling stuff out of the air. Now that there's data behind it, it's like, all right, here we are. We've got data on the personality side. Now we have data on the astrology side. So I don't care who knows what about what, because it's consistent with my internal wiring. And that's a big thing. Congruency is big. Me doing other types of astrology without the validation behind it, it worked, but it's sort of like wearing someone else's jacket. It'll give you clothing, but it didn't fit right. It didn't feel right. The VA, it hits all the marks and ticks all the boxes for me.
Is there opportunities for regular astrologers that are discovering VA to be able to say, if they've done a reading for somebody, to be able to submit their data as well to help with this?
That's an excellent question. It's tempting to say, hey, can we just go and get a bunch of data from other astrologers and analyze it? And there may be some merit to that, but there are some inherent problems with that. We refer to that as cherry picking data, because someone has a real good session, they do an interpretation and say, oh, the client said this, and it coincides with all these data points. All right, that's nice. But there's a flaw in that model, because then there's bias in the data that is being introduced into the analysis. So the way VA operates It's very similar to the methodology that's done on large-scale genetic testing. Let me explain. When pharmaceutical companies and geneticists want to find out who may be at risk for, let's say, developing diabetes, for example, one way to do it is to give genetic tests to 5 million people in the country, sequence the genes, see who's been diagnosed with diabetes, and then kind of build out from there. But the problem is that's not practical, and it's certainly not cost feasible. So what do people, how does genetic research work then? They will go and find a bunch of hardcore diabetics. I mean, really hardcore diabetic. No question, they're over the baseline that would be considered to be diabetic. They may have had it for a certain number of years. And they will go and find those individuals and then run a genetic sequencing on them and see what commonalities exist amongst these hardcore diabetics. If they don't find any, well, then either they keep looking or they head in a different direction. Because here's the deal. If there's a genetic component associated with diabetes, it must show up in those extreme cases. If it doesn't, then it's not genetically based. So we do the same things in astrology. There's been a lot of research done on musicians and different types of musicians, but there are certain planetary patterns that show up repeatedly in some of the world's best musicians. So a way that research might start is figuring out, all right, based on multiple sources, who are the top 15 or 20 musicians of all time? I'm talking about people who are in rarefied air, really up at the top of their game. So people like Elvis, Buddy Holly, people who really impact and changed the landscape of music and are well known. Mm. So then we'll look at that data and say, well, what's common? And in that, for those of you, your listeners who may be astrologers, Venus and Uranus are the two planets that seem to be aspecting in these hardcore musicians in certain vibrational patterns. So then we start with that, with these definitive cases where we know that beyond the shadow of a doubt, these people, they did change the landscape of music. They are professional. They have done things that no one else has done, maybe broken new ground. And then you start drilling down to maybe less famous folks. And then ultimately to people who play music, maybe not necessarily professionally, but for fun. And we start to look at the relationship. Does that hold up? Does it, the ones at the top, do we start to see those connections and people moving down the line? And that's how you begin to formulate these models. And as an evidence-based practice, which is what VA is, and most modern medicine is today, people think it's all experimental design, and it really isn't. As the evidence changes, we update the model because we can't do controlled experiments in VA because you can't make someone be something they're not. So we're looking at data analysis from the standpoint of where are the outliers in the real extreme cases, and then does that correlation hold through all the way down the line? Right. So, and it's tempting to say, oh, I did a reading, this was great, this person said this or that. Anecdotally, you can certainly look at that, but as far as a statistical modeling perspective, you don't want to go that direction because all sorts of bias can creep in there. Same with athletes too. There's multiple websites that will rank the world's top 10 athletes. So the way that research gets conducted, 10 or 20 or whatever you want to start with. And this is, remember, it's like a stew. It's always evolving, but we start someplace. So once there's some inter-rater reliability that the top 10 athletes are who they are, we'll pull their charts. We'll look at their aspect patterns. We'll see if what we hypothesize is going on. And if it does, then the research continues from there. If it's not, it's like, well, it's not these two planets. Is it something else? Maybe. And then we continue looking to see if there's any consistency. So it's a radical approach to astrology. And some of the astrologers that are out there kind of thumb their nose at it. They say, well, astrology's just been handed down from one person to another, and that's how it's got to be. I say, well, maybe, but there's no reason that all of this can't coexist. And that's one of the tenets of VA. We welcome skepticism. We welcome people asking questions. There's no reason that spirituality, religion, physics, all of these things can coexist it's not an either or situation. A lot of religions will say, no, you can't do astrology because, it impacts the religion, or astrologers, so you can't use data. Well, VA, because it is literally vibrational based, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds with atoms and vibrations and protons and neutrons, everything is covered. So it's a matter of looking at things through a critical lens and seeing what works and what doesn't.
So when you say vibration, you're meaning something like frequency of those planets?
That's correct. So the theory, and I'll always say theory because a theory is never, ever, ever a fact. And to say that things are proven, people say that all the time, but if you're a pure scientist, nothing ever is really proven. There's always things that suggest and support, but you can't, except in real rare circumstances, say prove. The idea is that each planet has a certain vibration or energy or frequency, all the same terminology, just using different nomenclature there, means the same thing. And because these planets vary with frequency, the theory is that they have an impact on us that affect different parts of our existence as an individual. So here's an example. We'll take the planet Mercury. And a lot of these coincide to some degree with traditional astrology meanings. But then once the research got started, some things that we thought were the case proved not to be really the case at all. So Mercury is the planet that a lot of people think of. In fact, we're in Mercury retrograde right now, and everyone goes, oh, Mercury retrograde, disruption of communications. Well, it can be, but it doesn't have to be. In fact, I did a post on that on TikTok recently. Mercury has an impact on communication, but what the research has indicated is at a core level, Mercury connects thoughts and ideas. That's it. It connects thoughts and ideas. Well, Mercury by itself doesn't do all that much, but let's say it aspects rather with the planet Jupiter. Jupiter brings an energy along that's all about expansion, and it makes things bigger. Usually when Jupiter is involved, you can think of it like pumping up a balloon. Boom, 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 boom. It expands. Now, yeah, it can expand things to the point where it might pop, but if you have Mercury and Jupiter connecting, and that energy is mixed. Think of ingredients in a cake or in your favorite dinner recipe. It creates something larger than itself. So when you have Mercury aspecting Jupiter, if that's in someone's chart, they're having that wiring or predisposition of those planetary energies to come up with big ideas and think big and think on a grand scale. Doesn't mean they'll do it. It's not fatalistic. Because another way that we think of vibrational astrology is it shows us what radio stations you have in your chart that you could, quote, mentally tune into. If someone is not interested in coming up with big ideas, but they'd rather go do something else, that's fine. They just won't tune into that energy. Oh, I did something here. Hang on a second. My apologies. I don't know what I did. Okay. There we go. They just won't tune in to those energies. And the universe gives us more things than we can ever achieve in this lifetime here on Earth. So it's not about dictating, well, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. There's some forms of astrology that operate that way. VA doesn't. They let you know what your options are. So when people say, well, planets have energy behind them, sometimes that's a hard concept for people to grasp. Well, the best way I can describe it is think of the sun, because you feel it. Okay. The sun is closest to Earth, and you can feel that heat energy when you step outside. And if you're by the equator, you're really going to feel that heat. Okay. Now that's the physical representation of that energy that is perceptible by humans. However, if we look at the model and we're looking at how these various vibrations impact us as an individual, some of these things transcend that physical perceptibility and impact us at a more subtle level that you can't physically feel necessarily, but still has an impact. So I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but the idea is that these planets regulate specific processes, and when we combine them, we're building these little radio stations or recipes that enable us to either gravitate towards certain things, have certain things flow very easily, or experience some challenges in particular areas.
Right. So in vibrational astrology, do you have options for doing like orrery, so reading for events or questions, or even electional astrology as well? Does that still work with that?
Yeah, it does. It's a bit different, and the things that we emphasize are focused more on what the energy of the day is. So, for example, let's start with the daily forecast, quote, horoscopes, because people always ask me, well, what about horoscopes? Are they BS? Are they this? Are they that? Well, it depends on the type of horoscope. Typical horoscopes are done by the sun signs. Well, you heard what I mentioned before as far as, well, sun signs really don't capture as much as we thought that they did. So the way I look at any type of forecast or horoscope that's in a large scale public format, I equate those to being sort of like the junk food of the astrology world. We all like a little junk food every now and then that, whether it's chips or cake or pie or whatever it is that people prefer, but you never want to make a steady diet of that. The same holds true with any type of forecasting, including vibrational astrology, because what we're looking at in those situations from a VA point is what is the dominant energy pattern of the day. And in my daily forecasts, I never mention a sign, and that blows some people's minds. It's like, but there's no sign. I said, there can't be, because we're looking at the energy pattern. Yes, your personal sign, your sun sign might end up clouding, not clouding, that's not the right term, impacting or modifying that energy to some degree. But when we're looking at the overall energy patterns, we're just combining the elements of which planets are aspecting what. So that works from a forecasting / horoscope perspective. The same holds true when you're looking at synastry, which is the relationship between two people's charts. For looking at events down the line, we're looking at the energy. And another way to think about this, I like to use different visual analogies because, admittedly, throughout my academic career, I'm a slow learner. There's no shame in me saying that. It takes me a while to get something. And sometimes I would hear something explained 3 or 4 different ways, and I never quite got it. And on the 5th shot, someone provided a different analogy that enabled me to say, the light bulb went off. So I like to give different ways of people to latch onto this.
Yeah.
Think of astrology overall, especially VA, as like a weather report, as opposed to a crystal ball. And here's what I mean. We watch the weather when the weekend comes up to figure out what the weather's going to be like. The weather does not have control over us. If you look at the weather report and see that it's going to be pouring rain on a Saturday, but yet you had planned a picnic and you want to go do that picnic in the rain, have at it. There's nothing stopping you. You're going to get wet, but the choice is yours. But the same thing with astrology. When we're looking at planetary configurations, there are some energies and cycles, and we all know this. We all know that there's sometimes we wake up and we feel energized with a little extra pep in our step, or we're maybe just dragging a little more than usual, or our mood can change in the day for no apparent reason. Well, one way to look at that is through whatever planetary aspects are forming and happening that can have an impact on the way we navigate things. So when we look at astrology through that lens of a weather report, it gives us an idea of what to expect. Today, I believe, I'd have to go back and look. When I recorded last night's forecast, today was all about solutions. I think Jupiter was involved, and there were like 5 planets. So today, collectively, and everyone's mileage will vary depending on where their own planets are placed in their own natal chart. But collectively, it's a good day to solve problems, get things done, because there was a lot of interaction between planets that are favorable for coming up with ideas and being inspired and those type of things. Now, does that mean that if you put that off and solve problems tomorrow, you're not going to be able to do it? Of course not. But the whole idea of astrology is it's almost like this roadmap to let us know where's the best opportune times to do things, and then where might we need to lay a little low if things aren't going to be as favorable.
Yeah, I always explain it as like you've got a roadmap. You can see the potholes in the road ahead. You can choose to drive through the potholes, or you can drive around them. It's up to you.
There you go. GPS is another analogy that I use. Weather report and GPS seem those two concepts are people are very familiar with both of those.
Mm.
And I do get a little cringy when I hear some astrologers say, well, this is it. Oh, Saturn is the big bad malefic. No, it's not. In VA, we don't have malefics and benefics. We don't. Saturn can help, because here's what Saturn does for those in your audience who follow astrology. Typically it's Saturn is the taskmaster, and it does all these things and it beats us up a little bit. Saturn strips things down to the core. Saturn gets rid of all the non-essential stuff that we do not need and helps us focus on what is critical. So when you look at it from that angle, yeah, it could be a little disruptive if it takes away our distractions and our toys, as some people say, or maybe even relationships. But it helps us focus on what's here and now. I love my Saturn. My Saturn is placed in my chart that has enabled me to build a business over the years slowly, because Saturn doesn't move quick. Saturn wants to make sure that things are built to last and that there is value there. And when Saturn is aspecting me, it's like, oh, that's good. Yeah, it may be a little tedious at times, but it's not a bad thing. That's just not what the data suggests. And every planet brings good things to the table. It's not like, oh, this is bad or good. And of course, living life, we're going to have certain opportunities that are more easily flowing, and others may be a little more challenging.
Yeah, that's lifing.
Yeah, it's lifing. Exactly.
So does an astrology reading session, say like a natal chart, work the same way? I mean, can you explain like the process at all? Like just a brief version of that?
So and every astrologer operates differently. And that's the beauty of astrology. There's no one right way to do it, but there are right guiding principles to use. So from a VA perspective, of course, we need the birth date, time, and location. And time is even more critical. I generally will not do a reading for someone unless I have an accurate birth time. And here's the reason why. It's not as impacting. Let's say someone's got a variance of a half hour or an hour. All right, in the natal chart, it might not have that much of an impact. But remember, vibrational astrology is about looking at higher octaves and vibrations. So we always start with the natal chart. But then we look at these charts that are referred to as harmonic charts. And those were discovered in the early 70s, like around the 1970s. And a harmonic chart is a theoretical chart that is created based off of calculating things from the natal chart that enable us to zoom in to different sections of a person's life. So depending on what the question is that's at hand, we'll spend time in various vibrational charts. And these charts, the first 32 and multiples or octaves of those are very well defined. But these vibrational charts go up to, into the hundreds. And we're just now starting to figure out what some of them represent. But here's an example. The fifth vibrational chart deals with creativity and play. So if someone has a lot of planets aspecting in their 5 vibe chart, they're probably going to be creative. Now, how are they going to be creative? Depends on the planets that are active. But not everyone's going to have a loaded 5 vibe chart. The 7th vibrational chart tends to focus on and indicate how a person is going to turn inward and have a deep internal focus, a quiet stillness. So people who have to do a lot of independent work and a lot of heady type of work often have a strong 7th vibe chart. The 9th vibrational chart has to do with community and how involved someone is in the community that they're in, whether it's physical, remote, church community, family community. Some people are not all that community involved. Other people, they live for the community. The 11th vibration shows us where we're restless and where we're always looking for the next thing. And people who tend to run on a higher idle and have lots of ideas, they have a lot of things happening in their vibrational chart, their 11th vibe chart, because they got to be moving. And when they're not moving, they get frustrated. And by the way, all of these are not just things that were handed down out of the ether. This is what the research has indicated by going back and looking at very, very famous examples and seeing what's going on in their life and seeing what vibrational charts are most active. So yeah, there are literally hundreds of vibrational charts, but depending on what the question is dictates where we're going to spend the most time. So anything you could do through other astrological means, you can do in VA. The approach is just a bit different.
Wow. Okay.
And a lot more specific too, I might add. If someone comes to me and says, I feel like I'm sitting on a big idea or something really big, like this could impact the world that I work in a way that I've never seen done before, and it might be an invention. Well, I'm going to the 13th vibrational chart immediately, because that's where innovation tends to show up. Big ideas, doing something above ordinary, standing out from the rest of the crowd. Discoveries often show up there. Versus someone who's an actor or studying acting or wants to be a therapist where they have to step into other people's shoes, I'll go to the 17th vibration, because that's about empathy and stepping into someone else's world. So instead of all this jumping around the chart, trying to cram stuff in and crowbar, well, it might be your the ruler of this house, but then we got to go find its, where is it in exaltation? We go right to the vibration and see what's going on there.
Right. And so you've obviously done many charts by now. Have you had any standout one? Well, this is an exact example of this vibrational. And it's
that happens. It happens all the time. Here's an example. Okay. It happens almost on a daily basis. I did a reading. This is probably a couple of weeks ago for an individual, and they had a very active 11th vibrational chart. Now, remember, that's restlessness. That's kind of like looking to see what's next. What are we going to do? They don't do well sitting by themselves and reflecting. They need to be active. Okay, that's cool. So the planetary combination that was in there, I believe, I'd have to go back and look, involved Uranus, Mars, and Saturn, I think. So when we combine the energies of all three of those, and this is how it operates in a reading. Mars is the drive to get something done. Mars is not always the warrior. It can be, but Mars is this drive and intensity. Saturn takes things away, as I mentioned before, to focus on the essentials, gets rid of all the garbage. And Uranus focuses us on living in the moment and having quick reflexes and responding instantly. Well, when I see that pattern come up, I asked this individual, I said, have you ever thought about or considered or had an interest in doing stand-up comedy? And they looked at me through the Zoom and said, oh, it's funny you mentioned that. I've always loved stand-up. I've never did anything with it. This is a 70-something-year-old person. Yeah. But I constantly write that. This is what they said. Hand to the universal gods. I'm constantly writing down little jokes and bits. I don't do much with them, but I said, I'm not saying you need to go out and be a stand-up comic, but if that's an area you wanted to explore, it would flow very easily for you. So remember, part of an evidence-based practice is not only does it have to hold up on the research side, it's got to work out on the practical side, which is the client side. So things like that happen all the time. People are like, how did you get to? I'm just following the protocols, because these planets suggested quick reflexes, thinking on your feet, because it's in the 11th vibe. Comedy is very much an 11th vibrational type of activity where people have to respond on their feet. They got to think quick because they might have to deal with a heckler or play something up that happens in the room and get a bigger expression out of it. So, and those are very, very cool moments. Another one that I did recently was for an individual who had Jupiter, Venus, and I forget what else, but those two are enough in their 5th vibration. And I said, do you travel a lot? Because Jupiter is about expansion, looking at, big things, horizons. Venus is attracted to beauty. 5th vibration is about play. And all you do is combine the meanings between all these pieces to build what we're talking about. And this individual said, yeah, I've been to 50 countries. So it's that type of specificity that was another element that attracted me to VA, because it just makes sense. And I'm, without knowing anything about astrology, you can tell I'm a pretty high intensity type of guy. I'm not playing around. I don't want to be digging, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's... Now, have there been times when I made a statement like this? No, not really. That doesn't apply to me. Okay, fine. It's there if you wanted it. If it's not of interest, well, let's look at something else, because I'll always look at what the dominant patterns are, and we start there, and then you can kind of branch out to things that are less influential in a chart.
Right, right. So I've noticed with transit astrology, specifically, say Jyotish, Indian astrology, they focus on auspicious times, and then if there's inauspicious times, there's remediation as well. Is there anything like that is in vibrational astrology?
Well, not so much as periods of time. And something else I want to mention as well that relates to this, and then I'll come back to addressing that. In Vedic astrology, and I'm not a Vedic astrologer, so the knowledge that I have about Vedic can fit probably on my pinky finger. So I'm saying that up front before I get the Vedic experts coming after me. There's a concept that one type of energy can cancel out another type of energy. That doesn't appear to be the case in VA. So some people say, well, if Saturn and Jupiter are together, one of them is going to win. No, the energy gets combined and it creates a different type of outcome. As far as auspicious periods or times, it ultimately depends on what's going on in the sky with regards to what's aspected in your birth chart. So I know there's some forms of astrology that say, well, your Saturn return, you're going to have this and struggles and all, and you use these wide swaths of periods of indicating when things could ultimately end up being auspicious or not. But the way it works in VA is, it's going to be the same meanings of those planets. They do vary a bit when they're aspecting versus what's in the natal. But Jupiter is generally a favorable planet. It makes things big. It's jubilant. It's buoyant. Uranus can be also another lively, exciting time. Could also be disruptive. So we don't have predefined periods of life that we would look at, particularly to say, well, between these years, it's going to be this or that. It ultimately comes down to the aspects and how they're hitting the natal.
Right. And then how that plays out at that time.
Because one way to think about this, and I had the hardest time getting this concept down until it clicked for me. How do the planets in the sky impact what's in the natal chart? And it was explained to me this way. Think of the natal chart as your cosmic DNA or your cosmic serial number. At the moment you're born and you emerge from the womb, the planets are in a particular pattern, unique to you. Even if you're born at the same time as someone else at another hospital across town, that energy, those aspects, which is the angular distance between particular planets gets stamped into our cosmic DNA. So that's our personal game board for the rest of our life here on this earth. That doesn't change. What does change is what's going on in the sky. Planets are moving right now as we're doing this interview. And when aspects in the sky form with those in our natal chart, it's like a circuit is being created. So that's why we get energy at certain times and then lose that energy at other times. Because when the aspects connect, the energy is able to flow through. And the more direct the connection, for the astrologers out there, when an aspect forms a direct opposition with no orb or trines or squares or sesquiquadrats or whatever, when those aspects are tight with very, very little orb and they're direct, you got the most amount of theoretical current flowing through that energy. And that's when you can feel and optimize that energy most effectively. And once I got that down, I was like, okay, now I get it. I've got circuits are being created in the sky. When the two sync up, that's when things end up impacting us at a personal level, because the energy is then able to flow or not flow based on what's going on from the transits.
Brilliant. Yeah. Okay, that makes complete sense to me. That's really clear, because that's one of the things I've been stuck on too with connecting those dots. So
yeah, here's the thing with astrology. Nobody knows it all. It never ends. Be wary of any astrologer who says they know everything. I've been at this a while, and I learn things every day from people who may have just been in astrology for a couple of years, because it's hard to really the scope of what astrology can do is pretty amazing. And there are people who spend their whole life, all they do is relocational astrology. They look at your planetary, your natal chart, and then look at the energy lines and figure out what makes the most sense for you where it makes most sense for you to live geographically. That's a specialization. Some people specialize in relationships. It is a whole world, an ecosystem, and it's fascinating. And you just start. If anyone's interested in looking at, I'd like to learn a little bit about astrology, just jump in, start looking at stuff. It's going to take time because there is a lot going on, but you'll be amazed that if you put in some time, how these concepts that seem to be a little amorphous suddenly start to come into play and focus.
Brilliant. Okay, so we're coming towards the end of the podcast. This is the point that I usually ask people. Is there a question that I should have asked that I didn't ask that you'd like to talk about?
I think we covered most everything. We covered the fact that astrology doesn't rule your life. We have free will. It's not fatalistic. At least VA is not. And it's, I think I'll respond to that with this. Astrology is not the answer. It's only a tool to help you get to the answer.
Yes.
It's a tool that helps you get to the answer along with all the other tools. And it doesn't negate anything else. And it doesn't negate religion. And it doesn't negate, problem solving skills. It's another tool. And if you look at it from that aspect, again, bad pun intended, it really helps put it into perspective. Now, I'm not looking at my chart every 2 minutes and looking at, I'll peek at my chart, usually once a day because I can. I mean, it's right here. It's easy for me to get to. But I'm not worried, oh, gosh, I got this big transit. It's like, okay, this is what we got to deal with and see what happens and just maneuver around it. And I'll leave you with this. Let's assume for a second that astrology is completely fake and it doesn't work and the research is flawed and nothing's valid. And even if that's the case, if you look at astrology through what it's designed to do, which is to help us navigate these different cycles of life, because that's what the zodiac is. It's a cycle of life. Aries is the beginning, Pisces is the end. And you got all these other stages of growth and transformation in there. If we use think of it as a plant. You plant a seed, that's Aries. When it's done, it's harvested and then you celebrate. And then you got all these other steps in between. If astrology and the energy thing doesn't even work out, it's not bad. It's not a bad way to navigate life because it helps keep things in perspective. It helps us look at stages. In the world that we're in now, we all want everything now, myself included. I'm not immune to that. But when we look at, all right, we just planted a seed here. We need to give it time to grow. We got to nurture that seed, got to do some pruning, got to fertilize, got to really build it up, it's not a bad way to navigate life.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's a lot more than that, but I always offer that just as another way to view astrology and how all that could benefit someone.
Excellent. So, Michael, how do people find you and your work?
Very, very easy. BlueRidgeAstrology.com. That's BlueRidgeAstrology.com. I do daily forecasts on TikTok and answer questions there. Same moniker. It's the same on all social media. Blue Ridge Astrology at BlueRidgeAstrology.com. I keep saying the .com, but you'll find it. Search Blue Ridge Astrology. I'll come up on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and what have you. And if you're interested in a personal consultation, you could go to the website, BlueRidgeAstrology.com, and you'll see some offerings there. And if you're not really ready to take the jump and do a consult, I even have some astrological reports that are available. They're not VA based, but they help give you some orientation as to what's going on and kind of lets people dip their toe in the water if they're not quite ready to jump in with both feet.
Excellent. I'm sure that many people will jump over and avail themselves of your services. This has been a very interesting podcast. I mean, I'm interested in astrology in different aspects of it, obviously. But I've never really knew anything about vibrational astrology until today. So this has actually turned my mind on in a new sort of way. And I'm thinking I've got to get that book straight away.
It is a great book. One last thing. I know we're about out of time here. There's another book that's out that's a lot more technical called I think it's The Astrology of Bipolar Disorder, which is a summary of a research study that was done with David Cochran and a mental health therapist. They found an astro signature that shows whether or not someone is at predisposed to experience bipolar disorder. So we're just scratching the surface here. There's all sorts of things that are going to be on the horizon because we may be able to start uncovering. It doesn't mean that someone's going to have it, but it means that they may be at an increased risk of experiencing it. And in that book, it's about this thick, and it's an easy read, but there's a lot of technical data in there. It lays out how the research process was done. Once you find the first book, you'll probably see links to that. I recommend that if you want to take the next step. And then don't blame me for ending up in the rabbit hole, because once you get in, it's a lot of fun and there's lots to explore.
Oh, look, I enjoy diving in for sure. So thank you so much for your time, Michael. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed talking with you about this and hearing all of your knowledge and understanding. It's been
thank you. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here. And I always enjoy the opportunity to share the whole VA experience. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks. Thanks to Michael for being on the show. That was absolutely awesome. I've really appreciated the time that we've shared here today. And my mind is absolutely blown. To me, the sound of what I've just heard, which is all about vibrational astrology, makes so much sense because I really appreciate the data-driven aspects of astrology as expressed in the show. Michael has actually reached out and said that he'd give anyone who's listening a discount for a limited time only, 20% off if you just go to Michael's website, which will be in the show notes, and you wish to have a reading, go through the cart and add the discount code of SN, and adding SN will take 20% off for you. So yeah, please enjoy that. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you come back to listen again next week, and I hope you've enjoyed this show. Thank you so much, and bye for now.